And the first one was about 5 seconds. It was, Mr. Jackson, this is Mr. Eddie, call me quick. You know, roofing is a funny game. You never really know who you're going to meet. You never really know who's going to call you. Sometimes it'll be a CEO. Sometimes it'll just be one of your neighbors. And it's never the same interaction twice. I remember we had this guy call. His name was Eddie. Eddie's probably a 75-year-old veteran. He fought in Vietnam, and he was a really cool guy, you know, had a lot of, maybe not a lot of, but he had, you know, 1 or 2 really cool cars in his garage that were pretty old, and had a lot of cool toys and stuff at his house. But Eddie was just really down to earth. But Eddie kind of lived in the hood. You know, he didn't live in the nicest neighborhood. It was probably an hour and a half south of us. We had done one of his neighbor's roofs, and so he called us out to take a look. And yeah, I met him, and he was really cool, and, you know, good up on his roof. You know, we ended up helping him get a new roof through his insurance company. Super grateful. You know, one of those guys that, you know, you just can't get off the phone with him because he's thanking you so much. And so we did his roof probably January, maybe 2021, and you know, one of those interactions where you do the roof, you don't really expect to hear from the guy ever again. And it was probably 3.5 months later, I guess 4 months, because it was May, it was Mother's Day. And I remember sitting down, we'd had a storm maybe 2 or 3 weeks before, where basically just the phone had been ringing nonstop. So it was really kind of the first day that, you know, kind of had off, and, you know, spending time with Mom. We took her out to her favorite restaurant, and I get a call in the restaurant. I looked down, I saw it was Eddie. And I was like, oh, you know, maybe something's wrong with his roof, or maybe he saw a shingle on the ground, or, you know, sometimes every once in a while you get a customer call and they just kind of want you to come back out. And so I was like, oh, whatever. And I'll answer that after dinner. And probably as we were wrapping up dinner, I get another call from Eddie. I was like, oh, okay, this is probably pretty urgent. You know, this guy was pretty chill, pretty down to earth. You know, I do remember that about him. So maybe this is something more serious going on. So I remember going to the bathroom towards the end and listening to the voicemails he had left. There was one voicemail that was 5 seconds, and then one voicemail that was about 3 minutes long. And the first one was about 5 seconds. It was, Mr. Jackson, this is Mr. Eddie, call me quick. And I'll never forget it. I wish I still had that voicemail for y'all to hear. It was one of the craziest, funniest things I'd ever listened to on my cell phone. And I listened to the other voicemail, and what he goes into is, Mr. Jackson, a whole tree has fallen on our house. And, you know, at the time it was raining. There had been a storm that day, but since he lives so far south, I didn't know if, you know, maybe it hit his house later or earlier. So I'm thinking, oh, trees hit the house. There's probably water everywhere. This is going to be an absolute disaster nightmare. And so we show up. His wife's outside. She's crying. She's all upset. You know, her home of 40, 50 years, however long it was absolutely demolished by this 90-foot tall oak. I mean, I kid you not, it was one of the tallest oak trees I had seen. One of those oak trees he had definitely been warned before that he probably should have cut down. And it was just all over one half of his house, hanging over half of his, you know, disconnected garage, and there's debris everywhere, you know, just stuff in his room, antiques. One of his cars that he kept in the garage had scratches all over it. It was probably a car from the 70s, 60s, something like that. And, you know, he's like, man, if y'all could just get a tarp on it. And, you know, you can do what you want. You can get a tarp on it, but you can't get a tarp on it if the tree's on the house. So I had my boss with me. He you know, left his family dinner to make the drive down so we could get this tarp on this house. And, you know, so he's like, well, we're going to have to get a chainsaw. So luckily he had one, I think, in his truck. But he's like, we're also going to need like a 100-foot tarp. I mean, like a 100-foot by 50-foot tarp. I mean, it was a lot of surface area that needed to be covered up. And again, not that big of a house, but just enough that we needed a really, really big tarp. And so, you know, we get out there with chainsaws. It's probably close to 9, 10 p.m. We're cutting this tree down. And we finally get it off the house, and then we're harnessed in. We're throwing the tarps all over the sides of the roof, and that's going to take hours in itself because tree landed on the roof. You can't step in certain parts, so you got to really watch your step. And it's pitch black now, so we got headlights on, and that was really all we had lighting wise to kind of help us, guide us, make sure we didn't fall through the roof or anything. But we did it. I remember getting down off that roof. He gave me a hug. It was the only homeowner probably that's ever given me a hug before. And he goes, man, I'm so grateful y'all came out and did this for me. And he's like, obviously I want to use you guys again. We'll call the insurance, get them out here, pay for it. And, the first job we did for him, we didn't make that much money. And I was like, well, this will be a bigger job. Maybe this will turn out better for us. But, more importantly, it'll be fun seeing somebody's house that's completely demolished. We'll get to rebuild it. This will be a fun project for everybody. And so we're excited. We actually called a PA. It was the first time that we used a public adjuster because the claim was so big. We knew it was going to be north of $50,000 of damage. And so we get this guy. He wasn't part of a firm or anything. He was just a guy with a public adjuster license. And so he comes out with us. He kind of helps us get the project approved. And it was probably 3 or 4 months of fighting with that insurance company to make sure everything got paid for. I mean, I remember Mr. Eddie would call me and be like, hey, I'll make sure they pay for everything. The pillows and the comforter and the blankets in the bedroom that got torn up by this tree. Make sure they get all that paid for. So, they fought for a while and they ended up getting a lot of it paid for. And I remember getting a phone call the day that the claim got approved from the PA, and he's like, hey, it'd be about $68,000. We're like, oh, that's quite a bit right there. But it was more than enough to do the job and make everybody happy. Then about 12 hours later, the next day, I get a call from Mr. Eddie, and he's, hey man, I see they paid, this much for the roof. He's like, but I got a buddy, he's been doing contracting a while. He's like, he's saying he can do it about 30, 35,000, all the damage, everything. And he's saying we can keep all the rest of the money, and, we can do whatever we want with it, get the car fixed, whatever. And I was like, oh, if your buddy was so good at his job and he can do it for cheaper, why didn't you just use him to help you get it approved in the first place? And, he got all mad, and, we were just like, look, man, we'll let you keep the money that they allocated for the other things, non-project related, but, we want to make sure that, we have the proper amount of money to be able to fix your house and get it back to normal. And, I didn't really think much of it. And then, of course, the check comes in a few weeks later to our public adjuster. And the guy we trusted and, we're hoping was going to do everything correctly. And instead of sending the check to us, he accidentally sends it to Mr. Eddie. Of course, after he takes his 15% or whatever cut out of the check. And I remember Mr. Eddie got the check, and I'm pretty sure he blocked my number after that. I don't think we ever got a phone call from him again. But moral of the story, always make sure whatever PA you're using, I would always use a larger firm. Never use a guy just off the street, word of mouth. Always do your research on it. And if you're ever down South Georgia and you meet somebody named Mr. Eddie, probably think twice before you do business with them. So that's all I got today, guys. We'll see you on the next one.